I wanted to get this video out on Robert Jordan's birthday since it's about the last 2 books he wrote for the series before he passed away. I chose his birthday because I remember a video with the cast of the show from a while back where Harriet said she prefers to remember and celebrate the day he was born. Unfortunately, I didn't have the bandwidth due to several other things going on then, but I've decided to release it now for a few reasons. 1, after the show got cancelled, hype for this series kind of died down. And 2, I felt at this point I had made you all wait long enough since I know my ranking videos still have a dedicated audience. So as soon as this video is done, I'll start working on the final video in this series, on the final 3 Wheel of Time books. But before we move on to one of the best books in the series, it's time to tackle the prequel. I learned when researching for this video that New Spring was originally supposed to be one of 3 prequels to the Wheel of Time. I am sad that we'll never get the other 2, but the one we got I do think works as an interesting companion book to the main series, filling out backstory for a few main supporting characters, even paralleling some of the events of the main series, reinforcing the cyclic nature of the overall story. The book begins at the end of the Aiel War. Moiraine Damodred and Siuan Sanche are taking their test to be raised to full Aes Sedai. But before they do, they hear the Keeper of the Chronicles giving a prophecy of the Dragon Reborn. The Amyrlin Seat swears both of them to secrecy, but it also starts their inevitable journey that's in progress at the beginning of the main series, to find the Dragon Reborn and guide him through the process to eventually win Tarmon Gaiden. With that said and done, Moiraine and Siuan still need to take their full Aes Sedai test, and despite how powerful they are, it's quite difficult. Moiraine barely passes, and Siuan does only somewhat better, but they both succeed. Reading this after these similar tests that Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elaine go through in the main series raised some interesting parallels. The inescapability of fate is a constant throughout the main series, so it's cool to see how that manifested even before the Eye of the World. It reminds the reader that the story of the main series is just one small part of a much greater pattern. But we do have one other main character to follow in this book, that being Lan Mandragoran. Lan feels very similar to the way he does in the main series, albeit less stable and even a bit directionless. Without Moiraine, he's primarily guided by his desire to avenge his kingdom by dying in a fruitless battle against the Shadow. It's a hard reminder of who Lan is, even during the main series. He's still driven to avenge his fallen kingdom despite everything that happens, and it takes quite a lot to pull him away from that commitment. Then he runs into Moiraine, who has left the White Tower to begin her search, and they don't trust each other, partially due to Lan having a bad experience with Aes Sedai in the past. Mainly that they refused to help during an important battle, where they would have been a game changer. But this leads to my favorite moment in the book, where Lan is curious enough to ask Moiraine if she could explain why they did that, and the reason turned out to be another one of their political games, which doesn't satisfy Lan and barely does anything to dissuade him, but it demonstrates a few things. It shows Lan starting to warm up to Moiraine, and it shows Moiraine being far more respectful to those on the outside of White Tower politics, which is one of her best qualities in the main series, and it's what enables her to reason with the Emond's Fielders, even Rand once he comes into power. But things come to a head when a member of the Black Ajah, Marianne Redhill, is revealed, and Moiraine and Lan join forces to defeat her. Unfortunately, with Marianne dead, even though she proves the existence of the Black Ajah before the events of the main series, Moiraine can't exactly go public with this info because no one in the tower would believe it, if how much trouble they go through to deny it in the main series didn't make that obvious. But after Lan leaves, Moiraine follows him, and she tries to convince him to give up on this inevitable failure and join her in her quest to find the Dragon Reborn, since it is a way to strike at the Shadow, and it may actually succeed in defeating him, at least in this age, and Lan agrees, becoming her warder. Now for the ranking. There are a lot of hardcore fans that love this book, but I'm not one of them. I love the Wheel of Time, but for the long-term setup and payoff and the incredible depth of the world, characters, and themes, and this book had a limited ability to show that. Now, when I read it is worth considering, as I read it right after Winter's Heart and before Crossroads of Twilight, but even within the slog, it failed to be a bright spot. Not to say it's bad or anything, I just didn't enjoy it as much as most of the other books in the main series. It has some moments I really like, such as the prophecy, the Aes Sedai test, and the connection between Moiraine and Lan forming. As such, it gets the C tier. Let me reiterate that C tier does not mean bad. I still appreciate it as part of the greater story of the Wheel of Time, but I consider it to be a good book that I'm glad I read. And who knows, I may revisit it sometime in the future, even separate from the main series, and maybe my opinions of it will change. But for now, let's move on to one of the best books in the series. I've seen some people say that Sanderson saved the series from the declining quality it suffered during the slog, and I disagree. Book 11, Knife of Dreams, is a fan favorite, and I wholeheartedly agree. My guess, even before I made this whole ranking series, is that Jordan was just really good at beginning and ending stories, but things tend to drag a bit in the middle. You can see this on an individual book level, and on the series level. Each book, at least outside of the slog, starts off really good, then the characters go on their journeys for several hundred pages, then the climax happens and it ties everything together in super epic fashion. The series has a really good start for several books, then the characters spend a lot of time just slogging through plot lines and going from place to place, then everything comes together for all of them in the last 4 books. The progression curve, for lack of a better term, is reflected in each book and the series as a whole. Just something I noticed as I was going through it for the first time. We begin with MacLeod challenging Eamon Valda to a duel to become the new Captain Commander of the Children of the Light, which he wins. MacLeod is an interesting character in terms of how he assigns his allegiances. His sister, whom he will fight to protect, is an Aes Sedai. Yet, he joined a group that actively hates Aes Sedai, but him doing this makes a lot more sense. In some ways, he agrees with the purpose of the White Cloaks, but he obviously doesn't agree with their actions, something he makes clear after becoming their new leader. He's trying to do what he believes to be the most right. It's just that in this world, that's complicated. I noticed while writing this script that this book contains a lot of payoffs for most of the main characters' plot lines, but there is one exception. Egwene. She was captured by the White Tower in the last book, and in this book, she's been demoted to novice and is constantly beaten, but she remains just as stubborn as ever, and unlike at the beginning of the series, we get to see a more experienced Egwene using that stubbornness against a character who richly deserves it. Elaida. And those in league with her are so immature they throw tantrums whenever she doesn't do what they want. Despite being one of the youngest channelers in the tower, Egwene is somehow the most mature of them. It's really satisfying to watch. Elaida is also becoming more and more unhinged, blowing up every time someone fails in a task, like failing to break the half-heartstone chain that's blocking the harbor around Tar Valon. Things obviously aren't going to end well for her. Moving over to Perrin, he goes to meet with the Seanchan as they have offered to help defeat the Shido. They find common ground surprisingly well, and Perrin even manages to convince them to help find enough fork root to drug the Shido channelers. Then he finally gets Fail back after a well-coordinated assault, along with more gays whose identity is hidden. But there is a tragic scene where Aram, the young man from the Tinkers who wanted to follow Perrin to fight the Shadow, is misled into believing Perrin is a dark friend by Missima, and he dies in the assassination attempt. It's really unfortunate, but such is the way of this world. At least he does actually get his wife back. But for something so long coming, this was probably the most frustratingly disjointed plotline in the slog. It's quite cathartic to see play out like a lot of major events in this book. I don't have too much to say about Elaine's plot. She becomes Queen of Andor after a really long political game, and some tactical opportunity where she destroys the armies of her rivals. There is one moment where she gets kidnapped by the Black Aja and Birgitte has to save her. It's another payoff that has been coming for a while, and isn't all that complicated to explain. Matt's plotline thankfully I found the most interesting aside from Rand and Loyal, which I'll get to in a second. So there are Seanchan forces coming to hunt down Tuon courtesy of Semirog and High Lady Suroth who just wants to usurp her, and she gets Matt to help her fight them off. Eventually they come to a head where they think they have Matt cornered, but in actuality Matt led them into a trap using the dragon cannons made by Eludra, an illuminator which is a person who makes fireworks. This finishes off the traitors, and after Tuon finds out that Matt is a brilliant tactician, and quite famous due to being a friend of the dragon, Tuon is so impressed by this that she completes the Seanchan marriage ceremony, making Matt her husband. Apparently he grew on her over the course of the book. Quite the development in the story, but unlike Perrin's plotline, this one is a lot more satisfying because it came at the tail end of multiple major events from the previous books building it up. Though my feelings on this are still a bit complicated, as I'm sure they are for many fans. Yes, this is a huge achievement for Matt, and it helps facilitate the Seanchan's help in more important battles ahead, but Tuon is one of the most hated characters in this series for many obvious reasons. She's the ruler of a conquering empire that takes channelers and tortures them into abusive slavery as living weapons. It's really bad, but it's what the heroes are stuck with. Now before we get to Rand, I need to touch on Loyal. Loyal is one of my favorite supporting characters in the series. He's a constant delight whenever he's on page, or on screen in the case of the show. I love his enthusiasm for writing his book about the exploits of the dragon. I love his innocence and aversion to violence despite his vigilance in protecting his friends. So remember several books ago when a bunch of Ogier, including Loyal's mother, show up saying they want him to get married, and Rand told them where he thought Loyal would be? Well, they finally caught up with him when he got back with Rand, and Loyal finally completes the marriage ceremony. The marriage was arranged by his mother and his fiancée's mother, and was therefore completely beyond his control, but at the very least, Loyal and his fiancée got to be with someone they actually like. With that said and done, Loyal tries to convince the Ogier elders to help with the fight against the Dark One, rather than returning to their homeland. He makes a pretty compelling case, reasoning that the Dark One winning and thus ending the world would be a problem for the Ogier. But even with the potential end of the world hanging over their heads, the Ogier are still stubborn to change their plans. And then a massive army of Trollocs appears just outside the fortress, and Loyal immediately resolves to warn Rand ASAP. Sure enough, Rand does hear about the attack, and he even sees it just outside the open window. The problem is, Lews Therin starts wrestling for control, and he manages to make several gigantic weaves of fire and earth, as well as gateways that kill upon touch, or death gates for short, to decimate the army. The Ashaman, including Loghain, see this and figure out how to make their own death gates, which helps fend off the siege. But after that's all over, Rand has trouble forcing himself and Lews Therin to let go of saidin. Loghain even comes in and says that if Rand is trying to prove he's stronger, he already has because his death gates were bigger. Eventually he does though. Then he decides it's time to meet with the Seanchan Empress. In a previous book, Rand was given a prophecy that made him think he was supposed to oust the Seanchan, but recent events have made him reconsider. He goes, but it's actually Semirhage who Rand recognizes, and though she immediately gets captured, it's not before she burns off his left hand. It's at this point that Semirhage decides to reveal his secret. She tells everyone that Rand is insane, but in such a way that he hears the voice of his past life inside his own mind. Reactions to this vary. Min resolves to support him, but Nynaeve is genuinely surprised. Rand's descent into madness, despite how long it is one of my favorite parts of the series. Every major beat of it is impactful, including the few times people on the outside get a glimpse into Rand's inner struggle, such as when he was triple bonded a few books ago. This instance is similar, as the people who truly care about him are horrified. While I was writing the script, I noticed that this book contains a lot of payoffs for previously set up arcs with basically all the major plot lines, and that may be why this is a fan favorite book. Now, just because they are payoffs does not mean they are the conclusions to these arcs. In some cases, they were just important milestones in the characters' arcs, but that does not make them bad. Far from it. Payoffs and epic climaxes are some of Robert Jordan's greatest strengths as an author, and they are a huge reason why I fell in love with the series to begin with. Now for the ranking. The notion that Robert Jordan was failing as an author and Sanderson saved the series from declining quality is just trash talk by people who haven't actually read it. This book has a lot of really impactful moments, and it sets things up for the final books very well. Remember, the final 3 books were originally supposed to be one book. Characters have accomplished what they needed to in decisive fashion, showing their growth in the process. And the world has progressed in some important ways as well. This was especially refreshing to read after going through the slog and not enjoying New Spring as much as other fans. Not only that, but it's one of very few books in the series that I feel balanced all of the characters' perspectives appropriately, so no one felt ignored for no reason like they did during the slog. Everyone got past major milestones in this book, something that at this point in time the series hadn't had anywhere else in my opinion since Shadow Rising. That book, as you may remember, was S tier. Thus, so is this one. With the benefit of hindsight, I'm happy that Robert Jordan finished his solo endeavors with another absolute banger, even by the high standards of this series. Final thoughts. My original plan was to release one of these videos in tandem with major events regarding the show such as news, trailers, or new season. I already did something similar for Percy Jackson, but as I made more videos and my subscriber count grew, plans changed. My vision for this channel has evolved drastically from when I started it back in 2021, which was also when I made my first ranking videos for the Wheel of Time and the Riordanverse. I think that making multiple video essays on fandom drama and my opinions on the industry has made me more open to making video essays about other topics. I'm even considering making a few non-book related videos, because there are just a lot of topics I want to talk about, especially considering that not very many people seem all that interested in general fantasy book content. That isn't to say I won't be making traditional book content. A lot of you seem to love my LGBTQ book hauls, to an extent that even surprises me a lot of the time, and that's awesome. I look forward to making more of those. But with the widening scope of my channel and the fact that I'm still unemployed, I need to focus on videos that I know the algorithm likes, that I like, and my expanding audience likes. But I know that a lot of you have stuck with my ranking series for a while, so I wanted to give you all a proper ending. Hence why I made my Trials of Apollo ranking video last December, and why I will be making my ranking video on the final 3 Wheel of Time books in 1 to 2 weeks from now. As a quick reminder, I have been approved as a YouTube partner, And if you would like to join my channel membership for a variety of perks, I would very much appreciate it. But for now, that's all from me. I'm Kylan Mythos, Tyshar Wheel of Time community, and I will see you all next time for the final ranking.